On today's episode, we're answering the question, no, we're not, because I'm on the wrong damn outline.
Such a good point. I really like to tell people that your website is a living entity. It's not ever really done because your business is never done. And it's just a virtual representation of your business. It's like a storefront. And you wouldn't, if you had a traditional storefront shop, you wouldn't just leave it abandoned after you opened up. You would keep refreshing it. You would keep changing it so that it is up to date with what you have to offer inside. So it is something that's worth kind of taking a little bit of time to keep up to date as your offers change, as your business grows. So I think that's really valuable to just think of as you do make those shifts. So diving into the next section after this, I see some introductions of you, Alison, and then Jenny. So I love getting to know the people behind a business. And I think it's a really, really lovely way to make this feel more personal. I will say this is, again, quite a lot of information for a homepage. And this feels like it would be more at home on an about page, because that's when someone is really ready and interested to get to know you on this granular detail sort of level. So I would encourage you to synthesize this down into something quite a lot smaller and then lead people through to the about page to read these sort of more minute details as they want to get to know you a little bit more. I also really love whenever an about section, which this I would qualify as, and an about page can be written from the perspective of actually being about the person this business is for. So whether it's your listeners or your customers or your clients. And whenever I see the word I said too many times in these sections, it sort of rings my little alarm bell, because ultimately, as the user, as the person reading this website, yes, I care about you, Alison, and yes, I care about you, Jenny, but ultimately I want to know what you can do for me. And I want to know why you are the people who can help me. You know, we as humans are mostly selfish. And I think there's nothing wrong with helping people see themselves in the business first, and then sharing why you are the right resource for them sort of secondary. So I really like to position these sections as a why this is the best fit for you and why we are the experts to help you with this. So I think thinking through that, honestly, a lot of the content here is great, and it really builds a lot of trust. You talk about a lot of your kind of record, your achievements, and sort of your qualifications. I think these are all great assets to just be reframed in that sort of view of being how it helps you be a better service to the people you're helping. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And as the person who wrote this website and who preaches exactly what you're saying, I'm feeling a little called out because I'm basically do as I say, not as I do when it comes to this, because you're so right. It is a lot. And looking at it now objectively through fresh eyes, it's like, what was I thinking? Right? Which is, we're going to put my ego aside. And that's also normal. Like, you can know everything about how to put together a great website. When you do it for yourself, it's really hard.
Oh yeah, no, it is really a challenging thing. It's like trying to put yourself on stage or public speaking. It's always so much harder to do it when it's you. So I do really encourage people who aren't naturally great at copywriting for themselves or making websites for themselves to just find valuable resources to double check it, whether that is, a web designer friend. I offer audits. There are other businesses who offer audits and just some feedback, but even just a business friend who can give you that outside perspective will be really helpful, because we're too close to it. You can't see it because you're too close. So it is really valuable to get that outside view, because often we know better. And when I call out these things in website audits, often people are like, of course, I know that. You just don't see it when it's yours.
I'm so enjoying this episode. I know I'm quiet, but I am sitting over here just taking a bazillion lines of notes. And Alison and I are going to have kind of like a come to the mountain meeting after this, because this is awesome. This is fantastic. This is so good. I can see exactly why people hire you to do what you do. This is phenomenal.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I think it is really just taking that step back, as you were saying, to be a little bit objective and look at how this is serving the business and what it represents for you. So I think it's always good to have a check. I like to think of it almost like a health checkup. Like we as people go and have a doctor check us. Why wouldn't we go and have one of our biggest business assets be checked up too?
That's an incredible point. And I want people to really get that one. If we go for our health checkups and we do our yearly physicals and things like that, we should also be doing the same on our website, 100%.
Yeah. So we've got our about section here, which we chatted through a little bit. I see this call to action and I'm happy to see you have some, but when I was looking through, the way you've worded this about the Thrive system is slightly misleading to me. And I would encourage you guys to think through really what this means, because I've got, a traditional about on the navigation here. I'm sort of used to and conditioned to think of like, okay, this is an about section. I'm going to learn more about the business. And the Thrive system to me implies a system that I can use as a business owner, which would indicate to me that this is going to tell me about your program rather than about you as a business. So again, it's a slight tweak of the wording, but to be really cautious that we're not sending misleading signals, so that either people will be nervous to click on this about page because they think they're going to go to a sales page and be pitched, or that they will head to this page thinking that they're going to learn about the system that they can go buy and implement, and then just be finding out about the business. So to sort of think through the phraseology of that call to action, just to help make sure people really know what they're going to do when they click. I like to think of it, anytime we ask people to take an action, we are asking a favor, and you don't want to ask a favor without knowing what you're going to get in return. So to make sure that that is sort of an even exchange, that you have asked them to click this button and they know what's going to happen next. We don't want any surprises when it comes to websites or with business really in general. It really builds a lot of trust if we know what's going to happen at every stage and know ahead of time what's going to happen when we take an action. Next section we have is the episodes. I love this. I think this is really great to have. The only piece I have to say here is that I actually don't know really where to click. And if I was looking at this particularly on a desktop, it has a sort of air of a blog about it. So I'm looking for a read more button at the bottom of this body text here. After I've got the image, I've got the episode sort of heading, and then I've got a little brief here. I'm sort of expecting a button or a read more button down here to know how to take the next step and learn more about this. You do have this sort of hover effect on the episode image, but it's quite subtle. And I like to think about making websites accessible, particularly for people who have different abilities. And if I was, colorblind, or if I had sight issues, I probably wouldn't notice that this was a change and indicating to me that it is going to lead me somewhere. It's clickable. Yes, my mouse does change into the little like white glove hand, but only once I hover over this really quite small section here. And I will flag this, that this will not be big enough for on mobile to actually So when I come down to the next section, we've got the most recent episodes. And this is a really great section to have. I think this is ultimately, if you are promoting this elsewhere, will be one of the sections that people are looking for. So I think working on this will be really valuable. And there's a few pieces here that I would encourage you to think through for a few different reasons. So right now we've got this sort of blog format with the image, the title, and then a little sort of summary of what the episode's about. And I'm conditioned as a website user to sort of recognize this and immediately look for something at the bottom to click through to dive in deeper, whether it's a read more link or a button, something like that. So I would encourage you to just follow that sort of traditional layout, because we are conditioned to expect it, to just add like a read more link down here. Then the other piece I would say that there's really here, we've got this image at the top, which has the episode and the title. And it's got this really subtle hover effect over the image when I put my cursor over it. And while that's quite pretty, it's not particularly accessible. And I really like to think of how to make websites accessible for people of all different abilities. So if I was, for example, colorblind or had, poor vision, this probably wouldn't register me as a change. It's very, very subtle, the difference. So if you're going to do something like a hover effect to indicate that this is a clickable area, it's really worth making sure that it is something very obvious, even in black and white. It's a kind of easy, quick way to figure out if something's going to play for people with all sorts of different vision issues. So right now, I don't see a huge difference if I translated this image into black and white between the hover version and the regular version. With that being said, there's also a couple of pieces that make me hesitate whether this would work particularly well on mobile. So at the moment, I do have my cursor turning into a pointer when I get onto the image, but I also have this kind of curious little button off to the side with 2 arrows, which I think is also a link. And it kind of makes it a little bit confusing to know which is the button. So I would encourage you to just pick the entire zone to be clickable. And ultimately, that's going to work really well on mobile because we like to make sure that anything that is a clickable link, button, image has a large enough surface area so that on a phone, our fingers can actually hit easily that target. So there are some sort of minimums to keep in mind, but if you make this entire picture clickable, you've got no problem. And again, this title here, this is a nice big clickable zone. So this is really good. I would just make this whole image the button and get rid of the sort of secondary button that's a bit misleading, to make it just really obvious how I get into that episode, because this is ultimately, I think, what a lot of your visitors will actually be wanting to go and dig into. So I think that's sort of the main thing. The other piece that would be lovely to see is just a way for me to go and find out more of the episodes. I have a teaser of 3 here, but I don't really have a way to go and see the rest of the episodes off of this section here. So having a nice button to say like, see all episodes is just a really great way for people to get into that archive and not have to make the mental effort to like, oh, maybe up in the top we have a button in the navigation to go find it. We don't want to make people think. So once we've got them captive and interested here, just make it really easy for them to dive in deeper. And that's a really quick win. Then I scroll down to this next section, and this is a slightly curious section for me. Ultimately, we've got 2 pictures here side by side, one that says listen now with a big button in the middle, and one says be a guest. Listen now, I think, is basically the same as what we've got here, the most recent episodes. So if we have some form of, listen on Apple Podcasts, for example, it could be interesting to just break that out into its own specific section of like, listen to the podcast here, and then link out all those places they can actually go and listen to it, versus reading the show notes, because that's 2 different actions, and that makes sense to be 2 different sections. So I quite like that idea, although I'm hoping that in each of the episode pages, there's links to go and watch all of the, to listen to all of the episodes. But it could be nice to sort of call that out separately. Be a guest is actually a really different thing that you're asking for people. So having these side by side is sort of asking me like, who am I? Am I a listener or am I a potential guest? And we don't want to sort of throw people off when you are asking ultimately some of your biggest calls to action. This is the kind of main goal of the website. So making these 2 sections really compelling, I think, will be really powerful, because these are the ultimate goals you want for the site. So I would encourage you to break these into 2 completely separate sections, making the listen now about how they can go listen, and then making the be a guest a really compelling call to action for the right kinds of people to get onto the podcast, and why it's interesting and valuable for them to be on the podcast. I think this really could be its own page as well, and I don't see it up in the navigation. I'm sure it is a page, but if this is something you're actively working on getting, new, really high qualified guests, I would encourage you to make that something really obvious and easy to find, because this is sort of your secondary user of the website. Your primary user is the listener potential client, but then really your secondary user is someone who wants to be on your podcast. And they have kind of 2 different customer journeys, let's say. Ultimately, the guest probably isn't going to be a customer, but they will be someone who engages with your business in a quite different way. So I really like to make sure that both of those user journeys are easy to find and easy to access. a lot of times I see this with websites where people get kind of conflicted when they have two different types of clients and they stress out and put all sorts of buttons everywhere. So it is really important to pick whoever the primary user of the website is. And I think for you, it's your listeners, and gear 90% of the website to them. But just have that little option so that the people who want to have that secondary user journey can opt into it and figure their way through it. So I think a really clean, easy way to do that would just be to pop a link in the navigation and then make this a separate section way down here about being a guest. And that means I can sort of figure out from there how I can take myself through that journey. And the rest of the website can be really geared towards the listener, the potential customer.
We've all heard the horror stories. The times the marketing campaigns fail, the big... Seriously, I was doing so damn good.
I'm gonna mute.